Error interval. Error interval is a bound question. Error interval has three types: decimal place, significant figure, nearest unit. Decimal place example. 1 decimal place implies that you should use 0.1, and to calculate the bound for 0.1, that would be plus or minus 0.1 over 2, and that will give you plus or minus 0.05. So for 1 decimal place, error interval for x will be x minus 0.05 less or equal x less than x plus 0.05. The lowest possible value, which is your lower bound, is this one here, lower bound, and your highest possible value of x, which is your upper bound, will be here, upper bound. So this is your lower bound, and that's your upper bound. For 2 decimal place, 2dp, and that implies we should use 0.01, and the bound for 0.01 will be equal to plus or minus 0.01 divided by 2, and that will give us plus or minus 0.005. The lowest possible value of x, or the lower bound, will be x minus 0.005. That will be your lowest possible value or lower bound, and this is less or equal to x, which is less than the highest possible value of x, which is the upper bound, and that will be x plus 0.005. That will be your upper bound. For 3 decimal place of x, 3dp, which implies we should use 0.001, and the bound for that will be plus or minus 0.001 divided by 2, and that will give us plus or minus 0.0005. The lowest possible value of x in this case will be x minus 0.0005. So that will be your lowest possible value or lower bound, or the smallest possible value, and that will be less or equal to x, which is less than the highest possible value or highest value of x, which is the upper bound, and that will be x plus 0.0005. Okay, example question. A number x rounded to 1 decimal place is 4.7. Write down the error interval for x. In this case, it's 1 decimal place, therefore we use plus or minus 0.1 for the bound, and we have to divide that by 2, so that will give you plus or minus 0.1 over 2, which will become plus or minus 0.05. So the lower bound of x will be 4.7 minus 0.05, which is less or equal to x, which is less than 4.7 plus 0.05. Therefore, that will be 4.65 less or equal to x, which is less than 4.75. Question 2. A number y rounded to 2 decimal places is 12.36. Write down the error interval for y. Likewise, since we're using 2 decimal places, so the bound for these two decimal places is going to be plus or minus 0.01, and then we divide that by 2 to get the bound, so it will be plus or minus 0.01 divided by 2, and that will give us plus or minus 0.005. Now, so the x or the y value would be, in this case, 12.36 minus 0.005. That's the smallest possible value, or the lower bound. So let's just write the lower bound. And that will be less or equal to y, which is less than 12.36 plus 0.005. And that will be the highest possible value, which is the upper bound. And the real value will be 12.355, which is less or equal to y, which is less 12.365. Significant figures example. If you have 4 figures as an example, something 4 figures, and you're told to do one significant figure, that means the first one here is the one significant figure, then the rest are just 0, 0, 0. And therefore, you're going to have your bound. Your bound will be plus or minus 1000, because there are 3 zeros. And to get the actual bound, is going to be plus or minus 1000 divided by 2, and that will give you plus or minus 500. So your error interval will be between lower bound and upper bound, and the lower bound will be, for x, will be x minus 500 less or equal to x less x plus 500. So x minus 500 is the lower bound, which is the smallest possible value, and x plus 500 is the upper bound, which is the highest possible value. For two significant figures, let's use 4 figures in the same way. So we got 4 figures, and we've been told to calculate the error interval for 2 significant figures. So the first 2 are the 2 significant figures, and what's left, turn it to 0. So it'll be 0, 0. And therefore, you're going to have your bound value. Well, we use plus or minus 100, but because we're doing the upper and lower bounds, we have to divide it by 2. So that will give us plus or minus 100 over 2. We use 100 because there are 2 zeros, and therefore that will give us plus or minus 50. So the lower bound, or the smallest possible value, will be x minus 50 less or equal to x, which is less than x plus 50. Likewise, to do 3 significant figures, so you've got your 4 figures again that we're using. So 3 significant figures will be the first 3 here, and what's left, turn it to 0. So that will be plus or minus 10, because we got 1 0. And then the bound will be plus or minus 10 divided by 2, because we need a 2 bound, lower class boundary and upper class boundary. Lower bound and upper bound. And therefore, for your x values, it's going to be x minus, that's 5, x minus 5 less or equal to x less than x plus 5. Question number 3, example on significant figure error interval. A number x rounded to one significant figure is 400. Write down the error interval for x. So we've got three figures here, not four, three figures, 4 and 2 zeros. So now we're rounding up to first significant figure. So let's just write 400 there. That's your x value. So the first is 4 significant figure. The first significant figure is 4. We got the last two, which are now 0. So if they're not, you round it to 0. So that would be, so the bound value will be plus or minus 100, because there are two zeros, divided by 2, and that will give us plus or minus 50. So the lower bound will be 400 minus 50, less or equal to x, which is less, and the upper bound is 400 plus 50. And therefore, you're going to get 350 less or equal to x less 450. And that's our error interval. 350 is the lower bound and 450 is the upper bound. Question number 4. A number y rounded to two significant figures is 67000. Write down the error interval for y. There are 5 figures here. So the first two are the two significant figure. We're left with 3 figures, and those will become 1000 because there are 3 zeros now. So you're going to get the bound, in this case, we've got 67000. And so the bound will be plus or minus 1000, because the first two figures are the rounded up, and the last 3 is 1000. So you divide that by 2, that'll give us plus or minus 500. Now the lower bound will be 67000 minus 500, and that's less or equal to y, which is less than 67000 plus 500, which is the upper bound, and that will become 500 for the lower bound, or the smallest possible value for y, which is less than 500, the highest possible value for y, or you might say the upper bound, and this is lower bound. Now, nearest unit is the final one. Nearest unit will be either 1 unit, 5 units, or 10th, or 100. It could be any of these, or even more. In this case, the question might be nearest kilogram. Well, because there's no value before kilogram, so that meant nearest 1 kilogram. So that's what that implies. That's 1 kilogram. And then your bounds will be plus or minus 1 divided by 2. So that will give you plus or minus 0.5. So that'll be your bound. They might say nearest 5 kilogram. In this case, they put a value if it's not 1. So the default is the unit. So that meant 1. If they need to put any value, they will put a value in there. So if they say nearest a value, so that will be, say, 3 kilogram, and then it will be plus or minus 1.5, your bound. So you always divide the number by 2, and that will be plus or minus, and that will be your bound. So that's what I meant by 5 units. And nearest 5 units will be nearest 5 centimeters. So that will be, so they might say nearest 5 centimeters. Well, that meant that your bound would be plus or minus 2.5 centimeters. They might say nearest tenth. A tenth is 1/10. That's what a tenth is. And therefore, so it will be, your bound will be plus or minus 0.1 divided by 2, because a tenth is 0.1. And that will give you plus or minus 0.05. So that will be your bound. They might say nearest hundredth, because 100th is 1 over 100. So that will be, it will become plus or minus 0.01, which meant that your bounds will be divided by 2. So you divide that by 2, and your bound will be plus or minus 0.005. Here's a question regarding nearest unit. The question says, write the lowest bound or and the highest bound of each measurement. In this case, A is 8 centimeters. Well, to the nearest centimeters, so that means 1 centimeters. So that implies 1 centimeters. So it's 1. So you do plus or minus 1 over 2, and that will give us plus or minus 0.5. So the lower bound of 8 will be 8 minus 0.5, that will be 7.5. And the upper bound of 8, so that will be 1. And the upper bound of 8 will be 8 plus 0.5, that will be 8.5. B part says 5.3 kilograms to the nearest tenth of a kilogram. Tenth implies 1 over 10, and that is 0.1. So to work out the band for that, it's going to be plus or minus 0.1 divided by 2. So that will be 0.05. So that will be plus or minus. So the lower bound of 5.3 kilograms will be 5.3 minus 0.05. That will be 5.25 kilogram. So that's number one part. And the second part here, with the highest bound, or the upper bound, will be 5.3 plus 0.05. So that will be 5.35 kilogram. Don't forget to put the units in case they request that. Thank you.